Joining us now, former Justice Department pardon attorney Liz Oyer and MSNBC political analyst Anthony Coley. He served in the DOJ as the director of the Office of Public Affairs during the Biden administration.
Let's start with that New York Times reporting about President Trump asking DOJ to comp him for the lawsuits and investigations into him. There were supposed to be guardrails. Those guardrails were an independent DOJ. Do those guardrails exist anymore?
Those guardrails do not exist within the Justice Department anymore, that's for sure. Only Donald Trump could think that he's entitled to compensation for being subject to legal process. People don't get compensated for having to go through a prosecution, even if the case is only dismissed. This is really just a shakedown. He's sticking his hand in the taxpayers' pockets to take money that is paid by all of us to try to enrich himself. And it's really par for the course with how he's treated the presidency writ large. Right now, there's nobody in the department who can stop him from doing this because he has fired all of the career officials who have all of the safeguards within their portfolios. Pam Bondi fired the ethics director of the Department of Justice, who should be telling her and Todd Blanche and many other officials that they need to recuse themselves from any decision making in this settlement that Trump is seeking from the department.
Holy crap, you guys, this is absolutely explosive. A federal judge just released internal Trump administration files that multiple members of Congress are calling the most blatant corruption scheme they've ever seen. And we're talking about people who've been in Congress for decades, who've seen all kinds of scandals, but they're saying this is unprecedented. This is on another level. And now members of Congress from both parties are publicly demanding that Trump end his term, demanding his arrest, calling for him to be removed from office immediately. This happened on October 28th, just days ago. And the fallout is still unfolding. But what we know so far is absolutely stunning. These corruption files that the judge ordered unsealed contain evidence that Trump demanded $230 million in taxpayer money, $230 million to compensate him for his legal expenses. We're talking about Trump trying to make American taxpayers pay for his lawyers to defend him in all these criminal and civil cases he's facing. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Which highlights the absurdity of Kash Patel's claims. Quote, there is simply no support for FBI Director Patel's recent assertion that Mr. Smith put the toll records in a lockbox in a vault and then put that vault in a cyber place where no one can see or search these files. It's not clear what cyber place in a vault in a lockbox Director Patel is describing, but Mr. Smith's use of these records is inconsistent with someone who was trying to conceal them. Lockbox, vaults. I mean, Patel seems to be all over the place in terms of exactly what this matter regarding Jack Smith is about.
The cases he's facing because of his own alleged crimes. The classified documents case, the election interference case, the Russia investigation stuff, all of it. Trump apparently demanded that the federal government, that taxpayers, cover his legal bills to the tune of $250 million. And not just cover them, but compensate him like he's owed this money. Like we should be paying him for the privilege of investigating his crimes. The audacity is breathtaking, and members of Congress are absolutely furious because they're saying this is theft from the American people. This is Trump using his position as president to literally rob the Treasury, to enrich himself at taxpayer expense. And the judge who released these files apparently agreed that this was serious enough that the public needed to know about it, that these documents couldn't stay sealed, that the corruption was so blatant it had to be exposed. The judge's order didn't just release the files about the money. The order also exposed that Trump's legal team has been withholding evidence and obstructing justice. The judge basically accused Trump's lawyers of hiding documents from Congress and from the courts, of destroying or concealing evidence that was supposed to be turned over. That's obstruction. That's potentially criminal conduct by the lawyers themselves. And it's further evidence that Trump's entire legal strategy has been about covering up and hiding rather than actually defending himself on the merits. Because if you have a legitimate defense, if you didn't do anything wrong, you don't need to hide evidence. You don't need to obstruct investigations. The fact that Trump and his legal team have been doing that tells you everything you need to know about his guilt. Members of Congress are now publicly calling for Trump's arrest while he's sitting in the White House. That's unprecedented. We've never had sitting members of Congress openly demanding that the current president be arrested and removed from office in the middle of his term. There have been impeachments, obviously. There have been calls for resignation, but actual demands for arrest, for law enforcement to physically take the president into custody, that's a whole different level. And it's not just Democrats saying this. The reporting suggests that a growing number of Republicans are also expressing outrage at these corruption files. They're saying this crosses a line, that they can't defend this, that Trump has gone too far. Now, whether those Republicans will actually vote to remove Trump or whether they're just making noise for political cover, that remains to be seen. But the fact that any Republicans are breaking ranks and calling this unacceptable, that's significant. Legal commentators are warning that if Trump's compensation scheme stands, if he actually gets away with making taxpayers pay his legal bills, it could permanently undermine congressional power and accountability because Congress controls the purse strings. Congress is supposed to decide how taxpayer money gets spent. The president can't just unilaterally decide to pay himself $250 million. That's not how the system works. But Trump apparently tried to do exactly that. And if he succeeds, if there are no consequences, then future presidents will know they can do the same thing. They can raid the Treasury. They can use taxpayer money for personal expenses. The whole system of checks and balances breaks down. That's why this is about more than just Trump. This is about whether we're going to have a functioning constitutional republic where presidents are constrained by law and by the other branches of government, or whether we're going to have an elected dictatorship where the president can do whatever they want with no accountability. The timing of this is also significant because Trump is still dealing with all his other legal problems. The criminal conviction in New York, the sentencing that's looming, the attorney who just quit after the judge's warning, the House investigations, the cases against his co-defendants. Everything is piling up at once. And now we've got this corruption files bombshell on top of everything else. Trump has to be feeling the walls closing in, has to be panicking about what other information is going to come out, about what other judges are going to order unsealed, about what other members of Congress are going to say publicly. This is the kind of situation where presidents make desperate moves, where they do things that make their problems worse because they're acting out of fear rather than strategy. So we need to be watching very carefully for what Trump does next, because he's backed into a corner now, and corner presidents are dangerous. The media coverage of this has been absolutely explosive. Cable news networks are running with this 24/7. The corruption files revelation is the lead story everywhere. Social media is on fire with people sharing the news and expressing outrage. Hashtags about Trump corruption and about arresting Trump are trending. This is one of those moments where the political conversation is completely dominated by a single story. Everything else fades into the background. And that sustained attention is going to keep pressure on Congress to do something. It's going to make it harder for Republicans to just sweep this under the rug and pretend it didn't happen. The spotlight is too bright. The evidence is too clear. Something's got to give. All right, so let's dig into what exactly these corruption files contain and why this $230 million scheme is such a big deal legally and constitutionally. First, the basic facts as we understand them from the judge's order and from congressional statements. Trump apparently submitted formal requests to the Department of Justice and possibly to Congress seeking compensation for his legal expenses related to multiple investigations. The Russia investigation from his first term, the classified documents case, the January 6th investigation, various civil cases, all of it. Trump's argument was apparently that these investigations were politically motivated witch hunts, that he was being unfairly targeted, and therefore the government should compensate him for the cost of defending himself. Now, there are very limited circumstances where the government does provide legal defense for federal officials. If you're sued or investigated for actions you took as part of your official duties, the government can provide you with a lawyer. That's standard, but this is different. This is Trump demanding reimbursement for private lawyers that he chose to hire and demanding it for cases that involve his personal conduct, not his official acts as president. The dollar amount is staggering, $230 million. Think about what that could pay for. That's enough to fund schools, to fix infrastructure, to provide health care. And Trump wanted to use that money to pay his personal legal bills that he racked up defending himself against charges of crimes he allegedly committed. The entitlement is just mind-boggling. Trump genuinely seems to believe that he shouldn't have to pay for his own legal defense, that taxpayers owe him this money. And apparently he was pressuring DOJ officials to approve this compensation, using his position as president to try to force through this payment. That's abuse of power. That's potentially bribery or extortion. Because Trump has authority over the DOJ, he can fire the attorney general. He can influence prosecutions. So when the president asks DOJ for $250 million, there's an implicit threat there. Approve this or there will be consequences. That's how corruption works in government. People with power use that power to extract benefits for themselves. The obstruction piece is also really important. The judge's order states that Trump's legal team withheld evidence from Congress and from the courts. That means when there were subpoenas or document requests, Trump's lawyers didn't turn over everything they were supposed to turn over. They hid documents. They concealed evidence. That's obstruction of justice. That's contempt of Congress. Those are crimes. And the fact that the judge is saying this publicly, that the judge felt compelled to put this in the order releasing the files, that suggests the evidence of obstruction is really clear and really damning. Judges don't accuse lawyers of misconduct lightly. There are professional courtesy norms. Judges usually give lawyers the benefit of the doubt. But when a judge explicitly says you withheld evidence and obstructed justice, that means the conduct was so egregious that the judge couldn't ignore it. What kind of evidence was withheld? We don't know all the details yet, but presumably it's documents that would have helped investigators or would have hurt Trump's defenses. Maybe emails showing Trump knew he was breaking the law. Maybe financial records showing the money flows. Maybe communications showing coordination between Trump and his associates. Whatever it was, Trump's lawyers decided it was better to hide it and risk sanctions than to turn it over and let investigators see it. That tells you the evidence must be really damaging, because lawyers don't risk their licenses and their freedom by obstructing unless they think the alternative is worse. So Trump's lawyers apparently calculated that letting investigators see certain documents would be worse than committing crimes to hide those documents. That's a pretty strong indication of Trump's guilt. The congressional reaction has been swift and intense. Multiple Democrats have given speeches on the House floor demanding Trump's arrest and removal. They're calling this corruption unprecedented. They're saying Trump has betrayed the public trust. They're arguing that a president who tries to steal $250 million from taxpayers cannot be allowed to remain in office. Some are calling for immediate impeachment. Others are saying that's not enough, that Trump needs to be criminally prosecuted while he's still president, that DOJ needs to indict him now rather than waiting for him to leave office. That argument conflicts with the DOJ policy we talked about before, the policy that sitting presidents can't be indicted. But these members of Congress are saying that policy needs to be abandoned, that it was never based on a firm legal foundation anyway, that exceptional circumstances require exceptional action. And here's what's really interesting. Some Republicans are joining those calls. Not a lot, but some. There are reports of Republican members of Congress privately telling colleagues that Trump has gone too far this time, that they can't defend this corruption, that the party needs to consider cutting ties with Trump. Now, most of those Republicans aren't saying it publicly yet. They're not willing to go on record. But the fact that any Republicans are even privately acknowledging that Trump's conduct is indefensible, that's a shift. For years, Republicans have defended Trump through everything. They've made excuses, they've minimized, they've deflected. But this corruption scheme might be the thing that finally breaks through, because it's so clear and so blatant. There's no way to spin trying to take $230 million of taxpayer money for your personal legal bills. There's no good faith argument for why that's okay. It's just naked corruption. And some Republicans are apparently reaching a point where they can't keep defending the indefensible. The constitutional implications are huge. Congress controls federal spending through the power of the purse. That's in Article 1 of the Constitution. The president can't just decide to spend money without congressional authorization. If Trump tried to get DOJ to pay him $230 million without Congress approving that expenditure, that's a violation of the separation of powers. That's the president usurping Congress's constitutional authority. And if there are no consequences for that, if Trump gets away with it, then the balance between the branches breaks down. Future presidents will know they can just take money from the Treasury without asking Congress. They can ignore appropriations laws. They can spend however they want. That would fundamentally change how our government works. It would shift massive power from Congress to the president, and it would remove one of the most important checks on presidential power. Legal experts are also pointing out that this isn't just about the money. It's about what the money was for. Trump wanted taxpayers to pay for his defense against criminal charges. That creates a perverse incentive. If presidents know that taxpayers will cover their legal bills, then presidents have less reason to follow the law. They can commit crimes knowing that even if they get caught, even if they have to hire expensive lawyers, the public will pay for it. That's the opposite of accountability. That's creating a system where presidents are insulated from the consequences of their illegal actions, and that's dangerous for democracy. We need presidents to know that if they break the law, they will face consequences. They will have to pay both legally and financially. If we remove those consequences, if we socialize the cost of presidential crimes, then we're inviting more corruption and more abuse of power. The exposure of these files is also raising questions about what else might be hidden. If Trump was trying to get $230 million from taxpayers and hiding evidence about it, what else has he been doing that we don't know about? What other schemes are there? What other corruption files exist that haven't been unsealed yet? That's what happens when you start pulling on threads. You uncover one thing and it leads to 5 other things, and each of those leads to 5 more. Pretty soon you've got a whole tapestry of corruption and misconduct. And that's probably what we're looking at here. This $230 million scheme is bad enough on its own, but it's probably just one piece of a much larger pattern of Trump using his office for personal gain. There are also reports that Trump has been contacting members of Congress directly to try to spin this, to try to convince them that this is all a misunderstanding, that the judge is biased, that the files are being misinterpreted. Trump's apparently making calls, having meetings, trying to shore up support among Republicans who might be wavering. That's Trump's standard playbook when he's in trouble. He goes into full political mode. He works the phones. He makes promises. He threatens. He does whatever it takes to keep people in line. And sometimes it works. Sometimes Trump's personal lobbying and his political leverage are enough to keep Republicans from breaking ranks. But this time might be different because the evidence is so clear and the dollar amount is so large that it's really hard to explain away or minimize. The judge who released these files is also coming under attack from Trump and his allies. Trump's already posted on Truth Social, calling the judge corrupt and biased, saying the judge is part of the deep state conspiracy against him. That's dangerous because it undermines public confidence in the judiciary. When the president attacks judges for doing their job, for enforcing the law and releasing evidence of corruption, that creates an environment where people stop trusting courts. And once you lose that trust, once people think judges are just political actors rather than neutral arbiters, the whole legal system breaks down. That's what authoritarian leaders do. They attack and delegitimize any institution that tries to hold them accountable. And Trump's doing exactly that with this judge. All right, let's break down what happens next and what the implications are for Trump's presidency and for American democracy. Point number one, Congress is going to have to decide whether to act on these demands for Trump's arrest and removal. You've got members openly calling for it. You've got a judge who's basically accused Trump of massive corruption. You've got evidence that Trump tried to steal $250 million from taxpayers. So what does Congress do? Do they impeach? Do they somehow try to have him arrested? Or do they just make noise and ultimately do nothing because Republicans still control enough seats to block any real action? My guess is we're going to see a lot of hearings, a lot of speeches, a lot of political theater, but actual removal is going to be really hard because you still need a 2/3 vote in the Senate to remove a president after impeachment. And I just don't see 67 senators voting to remove Trump, no matter how blatant the corruption is. But impeachment hearings themselves could be really damaging to Trump, even if they don't result in removal, because impeachment hearings are public, witnesses testify, evidence gets presented, it all gets covered on live television, and the American people get to see the full extent of Trump's corruption laid out. That could shift public opinion, that could erode Trump's support even among his base, because there's a difference between abstract accusations of corruption and seeing actual evidence presented by credible witnesses under oath. When people can see the receipts, when they can see the documents and hear the testimony, it's harder to dismiss it as fake news or a witch hunt. So Democrats might pursue impeachment even knowing Trump won't be removed, just to get the information out there and damage him politically heading into 2026. Point number two, Trump's legal team is in complete meltdown. We've already talked about attorneys quitting and getting disqualified. Now we've got a judge publicly accusing the legal team of obstruction and evidence tampering. That's going to make it even harder for Trump to keep lawyers, because what lawyer wants to join a legal team that's being accused of crimes? What lawyer wants to risk their license and potentially their freedom by getting involved in Trump's corruption schemes? So Trump's probably going to end up with an even worse legal team going forward, less experienced, less ethical, more willing to break rules because they're desperate or ideological. And that's going to make Trump's legal problems worse because he won't have competent representation. The quality of Trump's legal defense has been declining for years as better lawyers have refused to work for him. And this corruption file scandal is going to accelerate that decline. Point number three, the $230 million demand might become a criminal case. If federal prosecutors decide there's evidence that Trump tried to extort or embezzle this money from the government, they could bring charges. Now we're back to the question of whether you can indict a sitting president, but the pressure to do something about this is going to be enormous. Members of Congress are demanding arrests. The judge has exposed the corruption. The evidence is apparently clear. If DOJ doesn't act, if they just let this slide because of a policy about sitting presidents, that's going to enrage a lot of people. It's going to look like Trump is getting away with theft from taxpayers just because he's president, and that undermines public confidence in the justice system and in the rule of law. So we might see DOJ revisit that policy or find some way to bring charges that doesn't technically violate it. Maybe they charge Trump's associates who helped with the scheme. Maybe they bring charges and then immediately pause them pending Trump leaving office. There are creative legal approaches that could allow some form of accountability without directly prosecuting a sitting president. Point number four, this is going to have major implications for the 2026 midterm elections. Democrats are going to run on Trump corruption. They're going to talk about the $230 million. They're going to talk about Trump trying to rob taxpayers. They're going to argue that Republicans who don't vote to hold Trump accountable are complicit in the corruption. That's a powerful message, and it's backed up by actual evidence that's been released by a federal judge. So this isn't just partisan attacks. This is documented corruption. Republicans are going to have a really hard time defending this. They're either going to have to break with Trump, which risks angering his base, or they're going to have to try to defend the indefensible, which risks angering everyone else. There's no good option for Republicans here, and that's why some are reportedly starting to think about distancing themselves from Trump. The political calculus is shifting. Defending Trump used to be the safe play for Republicans because his base was so loyal and would punish anyone who crossed him. But now defending Trump means defending obvious corruption and theft from taxpayers. And that might be too much for even some of Trump's most loyal supporters to stomach. Point number 5, we need to watch what happens with the evidence that was being hidden. Now that the judge has exposed that Trump's legal team was withholding documents, investigators are going to demand to see everything. They're going to get court orders compelling production of all the evidence that was being concealed. And when that evidence comes out, when we see what Trump was so desperate to hide, that could be even more damaging than what we already know. Because if Trump was willing to obstruct justice and have his lawyers commit crimes to hide certain documents, those documents must contain really explosive information. Maybe they show Trump explicitly ordering illegal conduct. Maybe they show a much broader pattern of corruption than we currently know about. Maybe they implicate other people in Trump's orbit. Whatever's in those documents, we're going to find out soon, and it's probably going to make Trump's situation even worse. Looking ahead, watch for what Trump does in response to this. He's probably going to attack the judge who released the files. He's probably going to claim this is all politically motivated. He's probably going to threaten people and try to intimidate witnesses and obstruct further. That's his pattern. But every time he does that, every time he lashes out and threatens and obstructs, he creates more evidence against himself. He gives prosecutors more ammunition. He makes his legal and political problems worse. At some point, Trump's tactics are going to stop working. The question is whether that point comes before or after he's done irreparable damage to our institutions and our democracy. Also watch for whether any Republicans actually follow through on their private concerns and publicly break with Trump. If you start seeing Republican members of Congress calling for accountability, if you start seeing Republican senators saying they will vote to convict in an impeachment trial, that's a game changer. That means Trump's hold on the party is finally breaking. That means his political shield is cracking. And once that process starts, it can accelerate quickly. More Republicans will feel safe breaking ranks. More will decide their political survival depends on distancing themselves from Trump. And Trump could go from being the most powerful person in the Republican Party to being a pariah in a matter of weeks or months. The exposure of these corruption files is a major turning point. This is the kind of scandal that ends presidencies. Nixon resigned over Watergate, which involved much less money and much less blatant corruption than what Trump apparently did here. The question is whether Trump will resign or whether he'll fight until the bitter end. My guess is Trump never resigns. That's not who he is. He'll go down swinging and try to take everyone with him. And that means we're probably heading for a constitutional crisis, a showdown between Congress and the president, between the courts and the executive branch, between the rule of law and Trump's authoritarian instincts. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be unprecedented. And it's going to test whether our system of government can actually hold a president accountable when that president refuses to respect any norms or laws or constraints on his power. The next few weeks and months are going to be absolutely critical. Every day seems to bring new revelations, new scandals, new evidence of corruption, and each time the walls close in a little tighter on Trump. The question is whether Trump will ultimately be held accountable or whether he'll find some way to escape consequences like he always has before. This judge's decision to expose Trump's corruption files, this might be remembered as the moment when everything started to unravel for Trump, when the walls finally closed in, when the corruption became too blatant to ignore or defend. We're living through history right now, and it's terrifying and fascinating in equal measure. The stakes couldn't be higher, not just for Trump personally, but for the future of American democracy and the rule of law.